I'm starting to think that Robert Ludlum's The Bourne Identity was not as original as he would have had us believe. Hi guys, so before we get into it, a quick reminder that you'll find all my other Hammer reviews in my Hammer playlist, and there will be spoilers today for the most part. I will at least refrain from giving away the identity of the villain, or villains, as the case may be. So I'll give you a quick plot synopsis for this, and if you've seen The Bourne Identity, then it might sound quite familiar. So this is about an American guy who wakes up in Europe with no memory, and he's got access to huge sums of money left to him by some unknown benefactor, and he's got no idea as to the identity of this person or group, as it may be. The only thing that Robert Ludlum seems to have added for his 1980 novel from this seems to be the whole secret agent part. It's quite an eye-opener for me that this film exists, because that novel, The Bourne Identity, is probably one of my favourite books that I have honestly ever read. It's absolutely amazing. So this character, who's known as Chris Smith in this film, he has a little bit of time in recuperation. He sees a psychiatrist for a few sessions, and then he moves into some swanky apartment, again left to him by his mysterious benefactor. And his plan for this movie seems to be to just chill out in this place and hope that his memory comes back. This penthouse that he gets is quite funny. On the outside, this building looks like your typical really badly designed, grimy building from the 1960s, 1970s Britain. On the inside, totally different. The penthouse where he stays, it looks like some Ken Adams design set for a Bond villain's Alpine Lodge or something. There's buttons that the guy can press to make things happen. I suspect that filming on the outside and the inside were done at two completely different locations. So the film was directed by Freddie Francis. Very, very safe pair of hands. I've seen many good films from this era by Francis. If you watch a Hammer film and you don't see Terence Fisher's name come up at the start, then Freddie Francis's name is probably the next best one you can see come up. I didn't recognise any of the actors in this. The main part is played by a guy called Robert Webber. Now, looking on his filmography, he was 41 when he did this. I kind of feel like he was a little bit too old for this part. I don't know if the part was written like this or whether it was a case of the character was meant to be younger, but then they cast Robert Webber and thought, oh, well, we'll just have him be slightly older. But there comes a point in this film where we get a flashback of what this guy, Chris Smith, was about before the accident that led to his amnesia. And he comes across like a bit of an arsehole in that flashback. It turns out he was nothing more than like a hitchhiker going around Europe with hardly any money, and now and again he would scam somebody or let somebody down. He wasn't a particularly great guy. He comes across very arrogant. And my impression of the character definitely went down after this point of the movie. Now, there was an earlier Hammer film called The Damned that came out, I think, in '63, which also had a protagonist who was an American holidaying in Europe just really randomly. But the guy in The Damned was a lot more sophisticated. He was actually a little bit older as well. He's possibly like 50 or past 50. But he was much more sophisticated. He had his own bow. You get the impression watching that film that the guy has worked hard throughout his life and now he's just having some kind of early retirement. It was easy to believe that young British women in the 60s would want to go out with that guy from The Damned, have a little fling with that guy. But the guy in this film, Hysteria, it's much harder to believe that women would want to randomly meet this guy who's a bit of a grifter. He's a bit of a con man in certain respects. So I don't think the main character in this film is particularly strong. Having said that, I was still on his side throughout this as he tries to figure out what's going on and what's happening to him. So from that perspective, it's not the end of the world. I've just seen I've just seen a lot of other Hammer thrillers from the '60s where I've really liked the main character more. The atmosphere in this movie is quite good throughout. There are lots of creepy little mysterious things that happen in the vicinity of Chris. So, for example, he discovers a bloody knife on the floor. He spots an elevator moving by itself to indicate a strange person might be about to head up to the apartment. He wakes up in the middle of the night and hears screams from the next apartment over. Some of this atmosphere, though, is deflated by a really bad soundtrack. It's been a long, long time since I've heard movie music as misplaced as this. It's not that the music itself is terrible, it's just completely out of sync with this genre of movie. So pretty much all the music here is like saxophones and trombones, that kind of stuff, but it's just totally the wrong film for that. And it's constant as well, it's all the way through. There were times where I was thinking about a certain scene, this might actually be quite a scary set of circumstances, but for the fact that we've got this frigging music playing over the top of it. Chris has to meet several side characters for various reasons throughout the plot, and he engages in varying lengthy dialogues with these characters to the point where I was constantly thinking, this character might turn out to be the benefactor or the villain, or maybe the benefactor and the villain will turn out to be one and the same. And I guess the eventual reveal of who's who in the final act is sort of satisfying. I'm not massively convinced as to the motivations behind the villainy in this film, but I'll come back to that. There is one side character who is an absolute standout, which is this PI guy who Chris enlists the help of to help him find out more about himself and what's going on. This character would have been brilliant for Donald Pleasence, I think, but the guy who does play the character does a pretty good job. So to look at this guy is like in his 50s and he's really scrawny and he doesn't look particularly strong, but it turns out that he's a really effective little hand-to-hand fighter. And he does this thing where he throws his bowler hat down on the floor to indicate that there's about to be rough and tumble. And I just found it a really hilarious thing, possibly the best thing about the movie, actually. And this was something even the jazz music couldn't spoil. Going back to the motivations of the villains and the scheme that they put in place to get one over Chris, it just comes across a little bit too overcomplicated for me. And I've seen this in a lot of sort of older thrillers from this kind of era. Villains putting together schemes that are just too intricate, and often they involve a lot of assumptions on how certain protagonists are going to behave and react to things, and I just don't buy it half the time. And this is a prime example. And there's another Hammer film called Nightmare from '64, I think, which suffered from this as well. I think both Nightmare and this might have been written by Jimmy Sangster. Definitely one of his more unfortunate tendencies to have these overcomplicated villains' plots. There's also this thing at the end of this where the villains... I've given the game away, by the way, that there's more than one villain, but it doesn't matter. The villains at the end of this, once they're rumbled, they just kind of stand there and they're like, oh, you got us. Oh, well, that's the end of that then. But there's no attempt to, like, run away. I mean, there's no police there, so can they not at least try and escape or maybe fight Chris to the death or something? Why are they just kind of standing there, just kind of resigned to the fact that it's all over for them? I mean, this is a movie, you know, come on, give us some kind of sting in the tail climax or something. It's very TV movie-ish, the end of this. It's like the budget just literally ran out of steam at the end. I mean, even in TV movies, you usually get to see villains arrested at least, even if there's not going to be some final battle, but don't be expecting to see Chris throwing the villains over the balcony like it's Get Carter or something. It's totally not that type of movie. There's very little action in this, aside from the PI occasionally throwing a few punches. So on the whole, I mean, I did enjoy this, but I do watch a lot of movies like this. I think if you're coming to Hysteria, having not really seen many films from the 60s for a while, I don't think this would be the one to start with, in all honesty. There are much better films of this type from this era. So I'd only recommend this film if you're watching a lot of films that are similar, or if you're simply going through a lot of Hammer's films, then yeah, absolutely check this one out. But even in terms of Hammer's black and white thrillers specifically, there are better films than this to be seen. So Paranoiac is better, and certainly Taste of Fear is better. This one I would probably put more on a par with Nightmare, which I mentioned just earlier. Time to show you the version of the film that I've got. Here is my DVD copy of Hysteria. I don't think there's a Blu-ray available for this, but it doesn't matter. I'm perfectly happy with a DVD for this one, and apparently it's remastered. I could believe that because the picture quality in this was very, very crisp, very clear. It's just some of the audio I didn't like, specifically the music, but in terms of picture quality, very, very good. There's no features on this disc, but that's fine. I don't have time to watch features for every single film that I review. It says on the front, it will shock you out of your seat. I'm not entirely sure that's true, but advertising will be advertising. I'll definitely keep this one on my shelf. You know, I don't think it's one that I'll go back to too often, but you know, maybe in the future, if I'm doing another run through the Hammers, I I might be inclined to include this. Right, let's get to the bag of terror and find out what sort of score I'm going to give this film. So what have we got in the bag? We've got 1, 2, 3 bloody axes out of 5. This is a good movie. It's only just into the good category though. Maybe I've been a little bit generous to push it just slightly above the average score, but it's all right, you know what I mean? So I'll be back soon with another Hammer review. I think the next one I'm going to do is more of a horror film. It will be The Reptile. I can't remember what year that came out in, but I just recently got the DVD, or maybe it was a Blu-ray for that. I'm looking forward to watching it, and I will also do a review for it. I suspect it's probably a film from 65, 66, but I'm not entirely sure. I've not seen it before, though. It will be a first-time watch for me. Right, this was my review of Hysteria, and I'll be back very, very soon. Until next time, cheerio, bye-bye.